Rush is like just well timed.
Hi everyone, welcome to our first Leadership Talk in Liberty of 2022. We have here Rachel, who's going to moderate, and then Dennis, who's been so kind to join us. I'm Mia, the community manager, so.
Yay! Thank you everyone for coming.
Mia.
Thank you, Mia.
Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Sklar. I'm the VP of Programming and Content at SaksWorks, and it's so fun to be up here in the secret, super fun, extremely planty, also has amazing food, SaksWorks. I came up for my first time about like a month in, and I was like, oh, we're gonna spend some time up here, because it's amazing. I am so excited to have Glynnis here today. Glynnis MacNicol is an author, a journalist, a podcast producer, a expert on all things New York, and Canadiana. Also, no, you were about to say something.
No, I wasn't. No. I was laughing. Rachel's the Canadian expert. I'm the adjacent.
We're both Canadian,
Yeah.
but I'm the one who leads with it a little bit more. And I should disclose, I know her previous to this event. Glynnis and I are very good friends. We were business partners for 10 years in that we co-founded a company called TheLi.st, a women's networking company, which we sold last year. She went off to write more books and dominate the New York Times style section with her insights and witticisms. I came here to SaksWorks to experience more plants in my life than I really have ever, and it's wonderful. I love it. But when I was asked to think of somebody wonderful to bring in to speak here at SaksWorks Liberty during International Women's Month, I thought, well, why not use that as an excuse to bring in one of my best friends and talk about risk. That part was like a little bit, that came out of a conversation with Glynnis and Mia, but it does feel germane in these times. Glynnis and I also were previous to our company, we're both media journalists, media reporters, and so we covered news cycles and how they escalate and who reports what.
And largely freelance journalists, which speaks again to risk.
Yes, so we've discussed the topic of risk in our lives in terms of should we drain the corporate bank account to fly to this conference, or
Yes.
How are we going to get through the next week?
I think one of the reasons this came up was when Mia and I were speaking, I was saying I haven't worked in an office in quite some time, and I've never worked for a corporation. The last company I worked for was Business Insider in 2010 to 12, I think, when it was...
You mean technically the list was a company?
Well, technically the list was a company, but I was going to say, like, even Business Insider at that point was a startup, and then obviously we were a startup. So I was trying to think of like where the Venn diagram overlap, is that the right analogy?
Yeah.
Is in like my experience and how it pertains to sort of a corporate work environment. And the thing that I keep coming back to, certainly in my own attraction to narrative and stories we've covered, but also because Rachel and I have worked closely together for like 15 years, including this talk, I suppose, is a high tolerance for risk, and whether it was too high was often a conversation we had with one another. Like especially when we started a women's networking group, this awareness of what other people considered risky versus what we considered risky, and the pluses and minuses to that. And I think the narrative around success in this country, certainly the narrative around the conversation around demasking, the narrative around a lot of things is, a sense of like risk is always good. Or I'm watching all of these sort of streaming shows pop up around scammers, essentially.
Right, and Delvey, the Uber one,
and
the WeWork one is coming.
Yes, and also what's her name, who just went to jail?
Which one? Who? Oh, Elizabeth Holmes.
Elizabeth Holmes.
Right, there's so many.
Yeah. That I was just thinking, we like to, even if they're problematic heroes, we like to laud people for taking risk. But in reality, what does that mean? And should you be, and is risk good? I mean, I think that the takeaway from a lot of these shows should be risk is bad because a lot of these people are in jail, but we tend to focus on them far less. And also just going back to back to being a freelancer, when Rachel and I were, we got ourselves a lot of places by paying our own way. We got ourselves, I remember Rachel reporting a story from a BlackBerry, which was such a big deal in 2007 when we went to
on the bus.
Yeah,
on
we
the bus
went to
the
the
Hillary
New Hampshire
event,
primaries in 2007. But our tolerance for this
hand coding with good times
was very high. But it also certainly, I think, something I think about quite a lot as a woman as you age is the lack of infrastructure. There's a penalty to that, and it's I feel like I'm constantly having the conversation with myself of walking this line of, do you want to cross it into a environment where you are working for a company with benefits and a salary, or do you want to maintain the freedom with all the absence of benefits and a salary, and crossing back and forth between the two? And that I'm not sure that conversation happens quite enough. And that was that motivation for this
We
talk.
have not been in touch with HBC HR at all about any of this. I am going to backtrack.
I'd never have to deal with human resources, so good luck, everyone.
I'm going to backtrack a little bit and provide a little bit of context. I don't mean to book-splain.
No,
I'm going to
please.
tell you a little bit about Glynnis's books. She wrote a critically acclaimed 2018 memoir. No one tells you this about. It's the story of her 40th year and the realization that she didn't have many role models for being a child-free single woman who loved her life. And
person without children, for anybody who's...
okay.
No, I get emails. Childless, child-free. No one likes either word. So.
I thought child-free was okay. All right, person without children. Glynis and I were both...
I don't actually care, but for anyone watching, I feel like I need to clarify.
During the first half of our 10 years running the list together, we were both single persons without children.
Yes.
Then I became a single person with a child. The past diverged. But both of us, we constantly return to this realization of what the default expectations are in this country, in the country of our birth, Canada, in many other countries, that who looks after a family, a child, a person. We constantly realize the benefits to marriage that were built into sort of benefits and
taxes, benefits, travel, accommodation. I think when you, and we all experience this in different ways, but when you find yourself outside of the narrative, and the narrative manifests itself in laws, in support systems, or lack thereof often, you really become aware of the penalties of living outside of what a sort of a recognized way of being is, and that's a risk. That's risk.
And the systems are also the systems that are unwritten, right? Which are the systems of who gets the benefit of the doubt, who is more likely to be assumed to be on the side of the law.
Yes,
the law. It's we don't need to tell you that this country has a varying degree of systems of justice, systems of privilege. And so in talking about risk and the taking of risk, it felt like a good time to really dig in because of the way that risk is lionized in all of our...
Lionized is a great word.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I planned it.
Thesaurus
and I was like,
word.
when can I say it? But just especially coming from the startup world, and you see in the startup culture, like the narrative of I went without salary and I lived on ramen for years because I believed that my startup could change the world, and then I sold it to Google, and whatever it is, you do see this, and again I will backtrack a little bit how we came to the list. Originally, I came to it through being so excited about the New York startup community. This is in 2010. Until I realized that all the people I was seeing out at events were not the same people that I was seeing in the, up-and-comer lists and the 30 under 30, excuse me. Those were always invariably lists of white men. And I was going out and seeing a diverse group of people. I certainly knew that lots of women were involved, so I started something called Change the Ratio, which was about changing the ratio. If we're seeing a list of all white men, then probably people are being overlooked. Who's making the lists? Who's making those determinations? And how can we change the ratio around that? So it was about visibility, access, and opportunity, with the idea that visibility begets access, begets opportunity. Lots of backlash in 2010 around that. And then as we went on and we sort of like started a loose collective for women, people started telling me that this is a business, people would pay for this. And then I said to Glynnis was just leaving.
Well, again, speaking of, in the system and outside the system, when this was going on and I was at Business Insider, I was finding it increasingly, burnout was not really part of the conversation at that point. I wrote a piece for Elle magazine, I want to say as recently as 2014, I'd have to look at the date, about experiencing severe burnout. And when it was published, it was like the idea of burnout hadn't really entered the common experience that we all sort of have that understanding now. And I remember thinking it was just me. I was crazy for leaving my secure job because I felt so worn down by it. And then when I did, and with enormous penalties and risk and real questionable, like $75 a month on my credit card to spend on groceries, and that was it. Like, not, I think, a good long-term way to live. I was hearing from war veterans from their experience. It was such like an extreme response to it, where I was like, oh, it's not just me. And then slowly, as I think everyone has experienced some version of this, we have experienced, which was when Rachel was like, do you want to come start this with me? I was like, yes, I want to get out. I want to have control over my own experience. Was, to me, in that sort of risk assessment, I'm sorry to keep using this word over and over, but it really is what it comes down to. It was like my ability to control my time and how I spend it was far more important to me than the security that came with working within the scheduling that I was doing. And that I've been having that conversation with myself ever since. But there are such penalties for that. And I think once we started the list, there was a lot of
stability and money? No, there was not.
Well, I think this is where my realization came from was, when you're in the startup community and you hear about people raising all this money and then selling, when you really dig down, that first round is always a friends and family round, which means it's the people who can go around to their friends and family, it's mostly family, I would say, and raise $100,000 from people in there.
At least
$100,000, which is not, we're talking about like a different level of risk if you were operating in that environment anyway. And secondly, after we started the list, which is full of very successful women who, the story that always resonates, maybe the only story, it was when Sheryl Sandberg said that she was in an executive office and asked where the women's bathroom was, and nobody in the room knew because they weren't used to having women literally on that floor. I think that the women who joined the list initially were all sort of that woman on the floor where no one knew where the ladies' room was, and that we were in a sense providing the sort of conversations of like the one I was feeling when I left, which is like, am I the only person here? But as it progressed, what I started becoming more aware of is that the women who were able to move into the startup world were women who had partners with secure jobs and who had benefits coming from another member of the family. And that awareness for both of us, I don't want to speak for you, but I'm going to for a second.
Feel free.
That awareness was very enlightening, because I think within the startup world, you're really like, don't take the salary, don't do this. And once you realize the people who are able to say that, it really tempers the narrative around lionizing. It was like, well, if you don't, and I think this all the time as a writer, when I look around at other freelance writers and I think, well, how are they able to pay their rent? I'm like, oh, someone else is helping. And so, like, they're getting their benefits from somewhere else. And so it makes me really want to push back against sort of the heroic nature with which we have this discussion, and then following the pandemic and seeing everyone sort of experience this absence of structure, which it was sort of, there was, I think I might have written about this maybe for the Times, but like I live by myself and I work from home and I operate with very little outside support. And so when the pandemic hit and everybody was like, oh my God, I'm home and I'm not getting any of these benefits and I'm by myself. And I was like, oh, this is not, other people are struggling with this. And I just think this is like the way everyone lives. But
and our company was mostly digital. It was like largely online.
Yes, it was.
And so it was like it's kind of business as usual here, except for like the subject matter of the conversations was obviously had shifted dramatically.
Yeah.
And it was terrifying, but like
to be
our
aware,
work lives.
Yeah, I think it was really eye-opening to watch everyone be forced into a space where we were mostly operating anyway, and then you see everyone else have this reaction like this is crazy, and you're like, oh, we do live a little farther out from the ledge than we really should, and then two, understanding that, I mean, this is a larger conversation, but looking at all the sort of the unionizing that's been happening since, and this awareness of really tempering heroic way we talk about the sort of individual hero with this idea of actually heroic is the implementation of safety structures for everyone. And I think
and just
that
flipping the lionizing
yes.
to like people who don't have these benefits.
Yeah.
They're already taking these risks.
Yes.
Every day, everything is a risk. I mean,
Yeah.
at the beginning of the pandemic, who got to stay home, who had to take those risks of going out on the subway, going to work.
Yeah.
Where was their safety
Who was
net?
still on the train when everybody else was? Yeah,
Right.
And so I think it's really, I'm motivated in all of this to sort of flip our value system around and just be like, we shouldn't, all of the language we use around success, let's, invert that and be like, collective secureness should be, the heroic story as opposed to like.
And just one footnote on the startup stuff, and then maybe we'll move into the Great Resignation, because why not? Why not?
I'm an early adopter of everything everyone's going through.
So I remember early on in my change ratio days, there was a sort of like an in-house study released by this company called SV Capital. It's like a big investor. Ron Conway is like a big angel investor in like early stage companies. I don't know if, I'm sure he's still very active, but like he was very much lionized in the whole like in those early days when of like the social network was coming out that time. And the SV Angel released some sort of study about like what what the most successful founders, like predictors of being a successful founder. And I kid you not, it was like a young white male Stanford dropout. Like it was who had their first startup, and I was like, what is your sample? You are really pulling from like a very specific sample here. You are not getting everybody in here, but like the amount of privilege you have to drop out of Stanford. The people who would very much like to go to Stanford if they could afford it. Maybe they got in but can't afford it. Like that, the level of privilege you have to be a Harvard dropout like Mark Zuckerberg, a Stanford dropout and that was not acknowledged. There was a lot that was not acknowledged, and even in 2010, I was sort of very focused on the women part without thinking more broadly, as we have all been doing in the ensuing years, to include like all identities. But the more you think about like different identities and which identities are privileged and defaulted to be assumed to look like leaders, look like success, look like good bets, look like people you just want to have a beer with, who you want to roll up your sleeves with at 2 a.m. I mean, these are the phrases.
And
that
should
get
you be
bandied
rolling
around.
up your sleeves at 2 a.m.? I am a big fan of sleep. And I really think going to bed at 9 o'clock at night is like a goal, and sleeping for 8 hours is a goal. So that idea of like all of these narratives, having watched them play out, are just a lie so much of the time, because who gets to be I mean, if anybody but a white, good-looking dude dropped out of college, they would be punished for it in every interview and in every resume. I think it's not who gets to walk these, and even then I'm not sure they would be rewarded for it. Who gets to walk these paths and then what is, if that is what we hold up as success, what are the risks you're incurring by trying to emulate them? Because does it ever work out that way for anyone else? I think.
I do want to add that 8 hours of sleep is an excellent way to mitigate risk generally.
Yeah.
Just
I
sleep.
hate that. I think very early on I was like, this 15-hour workday is really. Can I swear in SaksWorks?
I'm not going to because I'm
baloney.
You can just use a Canadian a word and say, in Canada that's not a swear word. I'm just kidding.
Schitt's Creek.
There you go. Oh my God. Had a minor heart attack there, but I'm fine, and I am proud of the guests that we bring in here.
It's a great show.
A great show. Let's pull it back a little bit.
I was going to say, are we all over the place?
No. Yeah. I think it's important. This is the point. When people talk about risk, it's like put all your chips on the table and spin that roulette wheel, and only winners take it all. Or I don't know. Now I'm quoting ABBA, but could be.
I'm actually looking at the cover of my own book, which I haven't read, but when I wrote it, I'm not sure.
I've read it.
I've read it in a long time. I'm not sure I could have articulated what I was really writing about, and the further away I get from it, I am so aware that what I was really writing about was trying to figure out how to live outside, how to exist when there was no blueprint for the way I was living. And I heard from a lot of women after it was published, they were like, do you think you're the first woman to not be married and not have children? And I was like, I'm fairly aware that I'm not. And everyone has a great aunt who lives somewhere that's living a fabulous life. But I was like, the fact that I can't point to a movie or a novel or anything that reinforces this decision as not a failure was really penalizing. And as we move sort of into, I'm just thinking of Florida and Texas right now, but we're seeing both the penalty, as we move into a world that's telling fuller stories about people's experiences that don't align with, the John Wayne-ness of the American identity, and we're watching the legal pushback that's happening. I'm increasingly aware of how my very small, very individual experience is replicated in such larger ways, and is replicated in legal ways, and is replicated. I used to get irritated that I once sailed the Queen Mary for a story, and I was like, wow, I want to do this again. It's a great way to travel. I didn't like flying. And then I was like, for me to do it by myself, I would have to pay twice as much as everyone else, because they price things. But these are very small examples of much larger issues, and the risk of living, the comfort of living inside an accepted way of being, there is comfort and punishment, and the risk of moving outside of it. And so I think it sort of speaks to all of this, and in both good and bad ways, because I am an advocate for having a job with benefits and a salary.
I love it. It's a really
it's having money when you have worked as a freelancer and you're always hunting down your funds. Having money appear in your bank account and with benefits is extraordinary. And I get very frustrated when the language used around that is, why aren't you starting your own thing? I'm like, I'll tell you why people shouldn't start their own thing. It's called direct deposit.
I realized that the last job I had that was a full-time job with direct deposit was at the Huffington Post, which I left in 2008. I was contractor at Mediaite, contractor, and then freelance at Daily Beast, and then we started The List.
And the way we operated in those years as a startup, people were always like, wow, you're amazing. You're making the right decision. Good for you for stepping outside the mold. And then slowly you started watching everyone fall down and sort of crumble, and then they would almost apologetically take a job within a company structure again. And it just frustrated me that was framed as some sort of failure, and our struggle, constant struggle to just keep afloat, was framed as some sort of success. I'm like, I don't know that I feel successful when I'm not sure how rent is getting paid. on the first.
And the
again.
reality is too is that the message has been conveyed to companies and corporations and corporate culture that you would like people to flourish within your company and flourish, and that's one of the, not to be all corporate-y and stuff, but that is part of, baked into the ethos of SaksWorks, is that the whole person should be like supported,
including your green thumbs.
It's
it makes me happy to see all these plants.
Right,
when I come in
it
here.
makes you happy.
It does.
If Nicole was sitting here, she's the head of the Wellery, but she has all of these various points of all the ways in which the whole person is supported by, like physical fitness and like invigorating conversation and and plants and light. But
and a view of the Statue of Liberty.
Right, I mean, the Statue of Liberty. Hello, that is going right into what you were talking about the changing laws, the blowback to the expansion of identity in this country, the acknowledgement of a broader range of identity, and
who gets to have power and be seen as powerful,
and who gets to live their lives and not be persecuted for it. There are literally people, in Florida who are like, well, what does my kindergartner say when they're talking about family in school if this kindergartner has two daddies or two mommies? And we have a mutual friend in Texas with a trans child, and CPS showed up at their door and knocked. The
19th, the new news, it's the 19th, right? Just did a big feature on her.
Yeah, her name's Amber Briggle. It's awful. Amber's been out front. Hi, Kathleen. Has been out front on this for a while because she has a trans son, and so she had to be out front on it. She did a TED Talk on it, so she's like a very a recognizable person in Texas. She had Attorney General Ken Paxton over to their home for dinner to be like, look at our beautiful home, look at our beautiful family, look how happy we are, everything's cool. And then a few years later, Ken Paxton writes this opinion saying that being gender affirming and providing gender affirming services to trans children is child abuse. And then Governor Abbott is like, cool, let's call CPS. This is really happening. I know, I see your face. This is happening, and we see it with reproductive choice being limited in various states. We're seeing it. So when you talk about risk, Glynnis and I are both Canadian, as I mentioned. We both read The Handmaid's Tale in school, and it is, there's certainly, that's like the place where you're like, well, we don't want to get to The Handmaid's Tale, but it is a useful frame of reference to when you are used to this set of freedoms within which to make your decisions, and will you still be able to make that same set of decisions if the larger framework shifts? So I didn't want to get super dystopian here. I hope everybody's enjoying their lunch. But
I end all my phone calls these days with, I hope to speak to you again. I think we're sort of moving in the much, much larger picture.
Because the news cycle is...
But the news cycle is, but I actually think it's all, you can see, having sort of experienced the arc of this whole thing, not this whole thing, the arc of the last decade of startup company and back around, and then experienced the, I haven't said a talk in a while. Sorry, you guys are suffering from me having not done this for 2 years. But a thing I used to bring up a lot when I was promoting the book was women in this country couldn't have credit cards or bank accounts in their own name until 1974. And that was the year I was born. And so I remember doing, I was on KCLA maybe is the local LA TV station on their morning show. And I was sitting here, and there was a whole circle of all of the morning show anchors. And one of them, I think the main was an older man, looked very much like an older TV anchor. And he sort of leaned over and he goes, I'm just curious, do you think you don't want children because you were sort of born without the gene of caretaking or something along those lines? Yeah, that look, all the female anchors on the table went like this. And I was like, I said, I'm the first generation of women who's had financial agency outside of marriage or family. And the decisions I'm making reflect that. And I like to bring up that point here too, because we're seeing a very real world reaction to women being able to choose their own risk, maybe is the point I'm trying to make. Like, you are able to choose the trajectory of your lives in ways that we never have in all of history. And everything that's happening right now feels like a very direct response to that, from my perspective. And even just understanding small choices and how I can only, I'm just sort of individualizing this very specifically, but understanding choices I make in terms of my own health when I'm not working inside of a company, because in this country your insurance is tied. Like, can I afford these health follow-ups because I pay for my own insurance? Having to understand, like, if I can't come up with rent, I don't have someone to lean on to help. So like all of those decisions are very separated to me from yay for me for doing it on my own. Like, that narrative to me feels very dangerous to subscribe to without a lot of consideration for who's promoting it, and how much friends and family funding they have, just in a general sense. And that it's really, when we talk about, certainly career-wise, when we talk about, I hear this a lot because I'm not necessarily in it, but like, when you hear about career decisions, or like, take a risk, go for this, or work, and it's just like, really think about who benefits a lot from that language being used to determine success, and really what does success look like for you, separate from like, I sold my company to Google, you know.
I mean, we sold our company not to Google.
Not to Google.
I mean, that is a checkbox, right?
Yeah.
Who is setting the checkbox? And you know, there's a little bit of code switching between who you're sharing the information with, what you're leading with about yourself, and I think also, particularly now in this moment of coming out of the pandemic, one hopes.
Yeah.
But there's, I mean, it's this moment right now. This, like, masks off, everyone, let's party, is a moment, like a real microcosm of risk tolerance. How comfortable are you? What are the risks you come to? All of the people I know, all parents of kids 5 and under, they're not thrilled about this, except for the ones that are thrilled, but are outraged that their kids still have to wear masks, right? So what, you know, everybody's constantly
again, in your
out.
calculation of mask or not mask, whose well-being are you taking into consideration? I think that's a small version of a larger version too, of like, in your decision making, whose well-being are you taking into consideration? And in other people's decision making, whose well-being are they taking into consideration? Is it yours as an employee? What do you, like, is success the ability to go out mask free, or is it like, do you want to feel safer? I mean, all of these things.
Or is success driving your truck to Ottawa in the name of freedom?
Right. Or like, I actually think like very specifically, what is your idea of success? And I often come back to, for a decade now, my idea of success is like being able to turn my phone off at 7 o'clock at night and not turn it back on till 7 o'clock in the morning. Like, that feels like such. And you know, it's funny.
You're a wonderful co-worker.
No,
I'm just kidding.
Well, but this is part of this. But I actually think that is a reasonable expectation of how your life should work, and that we're not prioritizing that isn't the definition of success. Like, the definition of success should be to work less and less and less and less, in my opinion. And like, I can turn my phone off at 7. That feels extraordinary to me, but I actually think that should be everyone's goal. Like, that our well-being in that sense should be, you know, less work. This is maybe not the corporate talk everybody was going for, but I just want to remind everyone.
Everyone, take the day off. No, I have no authority to say any of this. But we will open the floor to questions and comments shortly. I will just say I love this job. I love keeping this job. I love keeping this job. Thank you for letting me keep
you all
this
to
job.
turn you.
It's amazing how many of these conversations end up with me turning to the camera and being like, please let me keep this job. Because we are in a moment of of never before reassessment of the risk calculation. That is what the Great Resignation has been about. What do I want my life to look like? What do I want my future to look like? What do I need? What does my family need? And also, a lot of it is we'll have Reshma Saujani, who has a new book called Pay Up. She'll be coming to speak in the next few weeks, talking about the calculation that the Great Resignation is often driven by the no choice. I would like to work, but the cost of childcare is prohibitive, and we crunch the numbers, and it makes sense that one of us will stay home. It is usually the person who is being paid less. Statistically speaking, that is usually a woman. For all factors being controlled, and so this you can't take all of these factors out of this particular moment. And so what we just wanted to do was have a super uplifting conversation about current events and choice. And that's totally what we did. And what everyone's going to go back and tell everybody they work with is what we did. Does anyone have any?
I'm just also aware, just like right before we take questions, is I think part of the motivation for me in this is that I feel like from the outside, I have a lot of freedom over my life, and I hear from people who have 9-to-5 jobs in my world that are like, I'm so envious you can do that, I'm so envious you can do that. And I make the choice to have a life like this, but I'm also always trying to balance it out with like, here are the risks that are incurred by these decisions. And like because I am able to go different and work from different places, but like I also never know where my money is coming from in any given, I just am
always welcome here at SaksWorks.
Yeah, I'm always trying to temper these narratives with like the reality that never seems to get attached to them, just so we all understand that because I don't like people being made to feel bad for not fitting some idea of success when in fact that's so completely gaslighty.
It is. Really, all of professional life is gaslighting in a sense, because we are there's shame around what your credit score may be. Mm-hmm. There's shame around what you earn, what assets you have or have accrued. Like I am a former lawyer. And I left, but this is how I met Glynnis, actually. I was a lawyer, I left law, and I was like, I'm going to take a writing class. And I met Glynnis in a
I was a waitress who was like, I'm also going to take a writing class. So you're seeing these roles have not shifted.
And when I left my law job, I had some savings, because I was young and single and had some savings and have many expenses. And so I was like, I can totally do this. And everyone was like, you're so lucky. You're so lucky. I was like, I know, I'm so lucky. And then the savings ran out, and I was like, oh, now I get it. And it was a little bit of a shift.
I hate the word lucky, by the way. I once wrote an essay about how much I hate that word, because it absolutely eviscerates and makes invisible all of the risk and work that goes into living a life that can appear like that. And
you just gave me my first entree for the first musical theater reference of this talk. It came late in the day, but
lucky is also a Wordle word, just in case anyone's a Wordle addict.
It is a good Wordle word.
Anyway, let's open to questions.
Wait, I just want to do this one from Pippin. War is a Science. If anybody's a Pippin fan, it is smarter to be lucky than it's lucky to be smart. Mm-hmm.
All right,
there you go. Questions. Thank you. Hi.
What made you decide to start a company, and how long did you have it before you decided to sell and buy?
Too long.
Deciding to sell means you have to decide to have a buyer and someone who's willing to buy it from you. The reason I think we sort of fell into it because I had started Change the Ratio. I had stumbled into this need, and then people started telling me that they would pay for the list to keep going, because I sort of was like a few months into it, and I was like, oh wait, I'm doing all this for free, and where's my money coming from? And so we decided to make it a company.
I was so burnt out from being at Business Insider that I quit, and at what appered to be the height of it, I was on TV quite a lot and getting tons of positive feedback and hated, which was, I think, the confusing thing about burnout is when you, to the outside world, are projecting every idea of success and you are really crumbling. And I didn't do anything for for as long as I could do nothing without running my entire bank account and credit out. And then Rachel said, well, maybe we should start this thing. And I was like, well, I'm gonna have to do something. And this thing appears to be the least like the thing I was doing and allows me the thing I want the most, which is I don't wanna have to report. I don't want to have someone else to have control over my time. So that was, the origins of, and we sold, we had it for a decade. We had it
for a decade. We turned down one acquisition offer about halfway through, almost a little bit before halfway through, because before I had Ruby. It was a serious offer, but it was for all stock in the acquiring company, and we were like, no, like.
Again, speaking of risk, like someone tried to acquire us to give us a ton of stock in their company, and I was like, who's paying my rent? Like this, I want cash. Like, there is really, there's a real, and again, when we talk about these, like, we sold the company for this much, but if unless, really dig down on these things, because if you're selling your company for equity or stocks or whatever, like actually when Con Ed sent me the bill, I can't be like, well, here's 0.1% of my equity in this place. So also, I think that when we started the list, a women's networking group, like we got mocked and nobody took it very seriously, and by the end, it was a thing that everybody wanted.
How dare you charge people?
How dare you charge? So
there
we were
was a
very.
headline in Gawker that was like, Rachel Sklar is going to charge you to be her friend.
Yeah.
It's like, no, the friendship's free.
We were just
Please
early.
pay to be part of the network.
We were a little bit too early on it, and by the end, everybody was. Rachel's much more the community organizer than I am, and by the end, everybody wanted to figure out how to do it. But we had it for a long time. We had it for a decade, and it enabled both of us to do a lot. But I'm very, very aware at all times that both of us have what I would think is too high or too low an aversion to risk. Like I sometimes look at both of us. I'm like, one of us should maybe be like a little bit more conservative, but neither of us were, and we made it.
Well, and then like in the middle of that calculus drops a unplanned, very welcome pregnancy for me, and so that changed the risk assessment a little bit, not as much as it might have for other people. But so to answer your question, we decided we wanted to sell a lot sooner than we were able to, and we had 3 acquisition conversations. The first one was for all stock. The second was a very serious one that almost came to fruition. We had worked very closely with this person, and it went off the rails right before the pandemic. And didn't have anything to do with the pandemic, but that it just ended up being like, it's not going to happen. And then in the middle of the pandemic, we were regrouping and figuring it out, and reached out to the woman who ended up acquiring us as one of a number of people saying, what do you think we should do with the list? And she was like, oh, I'd take it. And that was how that happened. So we both learned about asking for help and being a little bit more transparent with the things that we wanted and needed, which we had not previously been, I think, as forthcoming.
We're not encouraged to ask for help, but anyway. Everyone should ask for help.
Yeah, and I'm still not great at it.
Yeah.
But are there any other questions?
I was going to ask, what is one of the biggest risks you've taken, and how you convinced yourself to do that?
Going all in on me. What, are you nuts?
I've taken this again. See, this is where it sounds like, I've taken so many. I've taken far too many, some very big ones, and I think I just really probably should think harder about some things that I do. Moving to New York, deciding to become a writer.
Moving to New York. This is something I don't know how many people were born in New York. How many people moved here? What a decision.
Yeah, but I'm not sure I think through. I don't ever like to offer myself up as the example, because I actually do feel like I have a capacity to hurl myself off the cliff and then figure it out on the way down. And once you do that a couple times and it works out, you just keep doing it. And I do not encourage that behavior, because I've both been very fortunate and I understand that I have a knack for it. Becoming a writer and sticking with it, I think, is a big one. Like, that's a long haul of working for very little, and probably in the book somewhere I talk about, and part of it's timing, but when I started out as a media reporter for Fishbowl, I was making $12 a post, and I had to churn out, like, that was before taxes, $12.50 before taxes for each post. I had to churn out 10 to 12 a day, and this was before the 2008 crash, and I lived off of, which is short for like, there was a lot more media parties because there was a lot more companies that still had money, media companies, and I lived for a year and a half on the food that was delivered. To this day, I can park myself by the food in any party scenario because I lived off of that food, and I don't know that that's a good way to live, but I was able
Those
to
were
do
some
it.
good parties, I gotta say. They were
Yeah. So I think that
love a pasta appetizer tray.
I always know where the food's coming from. It's amazing. But that sort of thing, like, and I stuck with that for a year, and then moved to media. Rachel and I were together, which was, it was 15-hour work days, and so it was this sort of thing of like, I knew I wanted to be like a writer, and I knew the amount of things I've put up with to remain in New York City is probably not healthy. I mean, really, I'm aware of sometimes I'm like, I'm in a not healthy relationship with New York City because I'll just stay no matter what, including.
If anybody's interested in writing about loving New York, staying in New York, being with New York forever and ever and ever, you want to read.
Which is not a good thing. It's not. I don't know that this is like as rents skyrocket. Like, is this really? I'm always questioning. I think part of my interest in this, I keep saying, is that I'm always questioning my own behavior. Like, what are you thinking right now? You have Canadian citizenship. I've been in New York 25 years now. It's just so, but a lot. Like, and I moved to Paris.
But you're such a good writer.
But lots of people are good writers. I think
a good writer.
Yeah.
The New York Times style section is just like, Glynnis, can you write about this thing?
I mean, great, but
so
that's
great.
20 years of just keeping on and keeping on, and like with so.
You got to be a hype person for your friends.
Quitting my job with not a ton of savings, just because I knew I was really the burnout was so terrible, and then not going back. I remember I got a really attractive offer from
Upworthy.
Thank you. And I remember going in and they said, we really love you and we want you to launch Upworthy or help us launch it or whatever it was. Can you write? And I was like, amazing. Like, I've just landed on my feet after 6 weeks away. And they're like, and now can you write 72 headlines, 3 versions of each? And I was like, I'll find you someone to interview, and I'm going to go back to my $75 credit card for my Trader Joe's groceries for the month. Like, I just couldn't. But those are big calculuses, and I don't have a child to support, and I don't have, like, there are a lot of calculuses that go into this. 10 minutes? 5 minutes. I'm sorry, I don't have a clear answer for that, but I'm always second guessing myself. Like, what are you thinking right now?
I think especially in New York, right? Why do people come to New York? Like, you have dreams, right? You might have artistic dreams. It's obviously much more challenging to be an artist in the city and to find success in that. Or you can be the artist, but can you live at the level that you would be if you were going to be the lawyer? This was my calculus. Most of my colleagues from law school are like, they're all partners or whatever. They're amazing, but that was a different path. So right, like what are your goals? What is your calculus? And it shifts. Oh, it definitely shifts over time.
And also, I don't like the idea of like when it shifts that you're settling for something. It's just different priorities, and wanting security or some semblance of security in exchange for owing your time and reporting to someone is not a settling. It's just a different calculus in terms of what are you prioritizing in your life.
And being able to recognize what you need and what makes you happy, and short term and long term. And these are the tough questions that mostly get answered in therapy, and we are not therapists.
Well, and therapy is I'm story editing a podcast right now called Under the Influence, but
your face is saying it all.
Therapy is expensive. There's a reason everyone's looking at therapy influencers on Instagram right now, because it's really expensive.
But you should know that some of those therapy influencers come from a lot of privilege and might not have the therapeutic background. I just feel like I want to do the lawyer.
Also, it's a parasocial relationship. Anyway, any other questions?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
When approaching a risk, is there any one mantra that you feel kind of keeps you going through it?
I think, again, it comes back to what is your, I can't express strongly enough how averse I am to self-help language, and I'm about to sound like a self-help book, but I think understanding what success is to you and really interrogating the general idea of success and who benefits from that language, and figuring out what success looks like to you, that is always for me. I'm like, what does success look like to me apart from 8 hours of sleep a night? Like, what, which is a real thing. Like, well, am I taking this assignment on, or, how crazed will it be? Will this be is it worth the time I'm giving it? I think I'm constantly questioning, is the thing I prioritize most in my life, which is a level of control over how I spend my time, worth the risk I'm taking to attain it? Is the job that I'm saying no to because it would take over my life and make me vulnerable to whomever, is saying no to that worth giving up this money? It's like, what is the thing that I think is the most important part of my life, and and that doesn't always work. I've taken plenty of jobs where I'm like, but I've learned over time that if you're going to take a job that you hate, you just try really hard to make sure they're paying you enough, not just for the work you're doing, also for the amount of how much you hate your job. That's an extra tax. But so I think
we love it. We love it here.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that this is not like specific to any company, but when I think about what I'm taking on, I'm like, if I know I'm going into this and I'm not going to enjoy it, then I need the money to make up for that, because money is a real thing. But I think that's all it is. What do I want my day-to-day to look like, and how, that tends to take the most priority until prioritizing that means like the rent doesn't get paid, and then that becomes a different conversation. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
I think just to add to that, there's when you think about what am I going to say yes to, what does that mean saying no to? And if I'm saying no to something, is it because of something I'm saying yes to that that has been put on me? We often find ourselves taking on things, perhaps when we do have time, responsibilities, family responsibilities, social responsibilities. There's a lot of saying yes, again, not to generalize, but particularly for women, thinking about what, if I say yes to this, what will that mean I'm saying no to, and vice versa. That's
and I always think it's fine. When I was promoting the book, and I always say to people, like, if what you want is to be married with a family in a 9-to-5 job with great benefits, that's 100% a great goal. That's a great goal. Make sure you're just choose it because you're wanting it, and not choosing it because you're told that's what you're supposed to want. And that's a very small version of a much larger thing. Like, do you want to be in the corner office of someplace? Be sure that's what you want, and then make the decisions. But like, actually just be sure that this idea of what you want is actually what you want. Because I think it gets confusing with the way we're told to behave.
Checking in with yourself is useful. Yeah. That's a thing I didn't do for a really long time.
Sleep.
And then, just spending a lot of time at home during a pandemic when everything grinds to a halt and all your sort of dreams and plans are shifting. It's useful to think about
promoting the Great Resignation. Okay, last question, right? One more question. Anyone?
Do you see yourself going back to Canada?
No, never. I'm never leaving New York.
Okay.
No, I've resigned. That's the Glynnis is great. I say that, I'm always like, I'm never leaving New York, but I'm so aware of like what that means, like in my tiny apartment. But yes, no, I mean, I can't never say never, but there's no plans in that's not my backup plan.
For me, it's only to flee.
Yeah. I will say I didn't leave during lockdown. Like I had a lot of options to leave New York at the beginning of the pandemic, and many people made different decisions for different reasons. Like the idea of leaving New York was just the worst version of that, and it didn't really cross my mind.
And I fled. I went back to Toronto for a few months because I was a single mom, and if something happened to me, what would happen to my kid?
Yeah.
Risk.
Yeah.
Risk. It's everywhere.
There you go.
Yay! Let's all be safe out there.
Thank you all for coming to my first talk in 2 years.
Glynnis will be back in a few weeks to talk more specifically about the book. This was
the book is not all about risk. There's like cowboys in it, and road trips, and like hot Icelandic tour guides. So don't
a super fun
Rachel's in it.
Work friend. The work friend is
yeah.
underappreciated role in the. Thank you all for coming. You should feel free to go back to your whatever you were doing beforehand, but please come to other SaksWorks events. We have another one tomorrow. It's on Zoom, but it's with the entrepreneur behind Vestaboard. Have you ever seen those like big old message boards that switch on? And he was like, one day he was like, I think there should be a giant wall installation that you can program to have different messages, and he made it happen.
You should ask him how he got his funding when he got on the.
He went to, you know who he is? He's the Instagram wrapping paper guy. Remember, Dorian? Yes, we've worked with him before, right?
Yes.
Big dreams. He's a big dreams guy. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys very much.
We're gonna be sitting here for a little while.
I need to eat.